I'm a retired rheumatologist, but I'm greatly interested in history. So the South Haven Maritime Museum caught my interest when I first moved up this area, and I've been a member and also very and frequently visited the museum. Ashley Deming is our speaker today. She's graduated from Western Michigan University with a BA in anthropology in 2006. She worked as an education and outreach specialist at Thunder Bay National Museum, Marine Sanctuary in 2008. She then went to the University of Bristol in England to get a master's in maritime archaeology and history. She worked as an underwater archaeologist in South Carolina for 5 years before taking the position of Director of Education and Administration at the Michigan Maritime Museum in 2015. She's going to talk about the Great Lakes and why they're so great today. So we look forward to Ashley and your presentation. Take it away.
Okay, well, thank you, Richard. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? Okay, I'm going to assume that you can.
We can hear you fine.
All right, great, thank you. All right, so this is the first online lecture that I've done, so bear with me today, if you will. And I'm just hoping everybody can see my screen here with the presentation. So today we're going to talk a little bit about why the Great Lakes are really so great. So this is more of an introduction kind of into some Great Lakes facts and just some history. I'll be using a lot of visuals and some historic photos, mostly from the South Haven area, because that is what we have in our collection. So I think South Haven is pretty much a microcosm of things that were happening all over the Great Lakes here in different regions. So it really serves as a good example. All right, let's get it started. So let's learn some fun facts about the Great Lakes here. Okay, I have to move my little Zoom picture. Sorry about that, because it's getting in the way. All right, so many of you may know, maybe not, but the name Michigan is the French form of the Ojibwa word Michigama, meaning large water or large lake. Obviously, we have a lot of water, so that makes a lot of sense. The total surface area of the water that we have is over 95,000 square miles. That is pretty substantial. We have 3,288 miles of coastline on Michigan, we're talking about. And then it represents 20% of the world's fresh water. That's 6 quadrillion gallons. I didn't even know that quadrillion was a thing before I put this presentation together and learned a little bit more about the water that we actually have. If we were to drain the Great Lakes over everywhere here in Northern America and South America, it would be 1 foot of water over both of those places. So that's a pretty substantial amount of water that we have here in our Great Lakes. They border 7 states and 1 Canadian province, which is Ontario, just the one. So Ontario is pretty large. And it contains 35,000 islands. I know Kim, our host here today, is actually on one of those islands right now on Mackinac Island. So thanks for joining us from one of those amazing islands, Kim. Manitoulin Island, which is in Lake Huron, is the largest island in a freshwater lake in the world. So that's pretty impressive here that we can claim that in our Great Lakes as well. So you can see the profile of the Great Lakes here. Obviously, many of you know that this was formed by glaciers, so we're actually in a bit of a basin. As those glaciers receded, they scoured the bedrock and the other sediment, creating and leaving behind the water that we have in the Great Lakes that we know and love. That's about 10,000 years ago that we're looking at that, and we're still bounding back from the weight of that glacier. So it's still rising a little bit as a result of that. Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake in the world. We can see that that's got a depth of 1,333 feet. That is pretty substantial. We see Lake Michigan and Lake Huron are actually the same body of water hydrologically. Even though we separate them, they're actually the same, but they do vary in depth a little bit. And then Lake Michigan is actually the only Great Lake that is entirely within the United States. All of the other Great Lakes border Canada, but Lake Michigan doesn't. So that comes into play when we talk a little bit about World War II. I'm sure we have a lot of fishermen out in the Great Lakes. We have a lot of fish species, over 177. 139 are native species and 34 non-native. Now, non-native is different than invasive. We maybe have put them in, but they don't impact negatively the environment that we have. So that's the difference there in the non-native species. The largest fish is the lake sturgeon. We've got salmon, walleye, trout, muskie, other species that are popular with recreational fishing right now. Whitefish, walleye, perch, cisco make up most of the commercial fishery as we know at the moment. Commercial and recreational and tribal fisheries are collectively valued at more than $7 billion annually and support more than 75,000 jobs. That's a pretty substantial industry to have here in the Great Lakes. I know there's some legislation out there right now that's looking at changing our commercial fishing so that it's only tribal groups have licenses for that. And getting away with commercial fishing licenses. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out here in the near future. All right, now we're looking at some invasive species. If any of you are anglers out there, I'm sure you've come across some of these invasive species, especially the lamprey. But if you've walked a beach, I'm sure you've come across the zebra mussel. They're pretty sharp and they really attach to everything. They're filter feeders. And they came over in ballast water from Asia. They have a tendency to eat up the smaller food that smaller fish eat, which again affects the entire food chain. So that's really changed the dynamic of the Great Lakes. Additionally, because they're filter feeders, they clear out all that algae and plant growth that's in there. It's part of the reason why our lakes are so clear right now, and that has changed over time. And also that changes where fish go. They want to go maybe to deeper water where it's a little bit darker and they can hide from other predators. So it really has changed a lot of how our ecosystem functions. Of course, carp, Asian carp, everybody's really concerned about those in the Great Lakes. We hope we can keep them out. There has been DNA found in the Great Lakes, but we haven't actually found an Asian carp living here yet. We are concerned about them coming up through the Mississippi, getting in kind of through Chicago there. And so there's some areas that Joliet that has some, they're trying to figure out the best way to get rid of them and not have them come in. Now, we don't have as many invasive species coming in as we have in the past, and partly because we've put a lot of restrictions on vessels that come in, large tanking ships, so, you know, cargo ships that come in from other countries. We have different filters and different preventative measures to make sure that we don't have invasive species now. Unfortunately, once they take hold and they're in for a long time. Our DNR has looked at how to mitigate some of the problems, especially with the lamprey. So they are able to try and keep the populations down a little bit, but that really, it's done irreparable damage to many of our fish species, which has changed our commercial and recreational fishing. All right, let's talk a little bit about historic commercial fishing. We predominantly saw this as an industry in the Great Lakes in the 19th and 20th centuries. The types of fish that they commercially fished for have changed through time. Whitefish, lake trout, perch, cisco, which is also known as lake herring, and chubs were popular throughout commercial fishing. We don't see lake trout as much. That population was really severely hit by the lamprey. So there were some changes in that. Obviously, we want to have a sustainable fishery, so that's something that DNR and other environmental organizations are looking at, so we can fish as responsibly as possible. But that wasn't the case during kind of World War II around that same time period. There was such a high demand to have fish to feed people here during the war effort because of increased industrialization. There was a lot of pollution in our Great Lakes during that time period, and that affected the fish populations and put a real strain on them. Of course, we already talked about invasive species. So there's a lot of impacts that can affect those populations, and of course then the industry. We had changes in what we were fishing and how we were fishing. So the gill net that you see here on LCJ, which is a 1945 fish tug, we didn't use gill nets anymore. There was transitions to trap nets. And because of the changes in the nets, we had to see changes in the style of boat. And so a lot of families that were used to this commercial fishing, again, they were mostly family-run businesses. They couldn't afford the changes. They had to go out farther for the fish, which cost more fuel. They had to change their boats because of the change in the nets, and they just eventually kind of went under. They weren't able to sustain that industry. And by the 80s, for all of these numbers of reasons that I've just mentioned, we really don't see a lot of commercial fishing anymore. Certainly in the lower parts of the Great Lakes, there's still some. I think when I spoke a couple of years ago to someone at the DNR, there was maybe 1,500 commercial fishing licenses Great Lakes wide for Michigan. So definitely not that many when you look at it. Here's just some great historic photos. We've got Chris Jensen there at Jensen's Fish House. He was a Danish immigrant that came over in the 1930s, started the commercial fishing industry here in South Haven in 1932, where they sold a lot of perch and were known for their smoked fish. That continued well into the 1970s, and right about the time that his grandson was going to take over, the industry really had started to collapse. So these are just some really great pictures of that time period. And then Evelyn S., which is a 1939 gillnet commercial fish tug that we have here on land, fished I think predominantly out of the Muskegon area then. So there's an opportunity to come to the museum and see her, but I'll talk about her a little bit later. And then the upper right corner there is one of the fishermen trying to detangle a net after some storm damage. And that's there on the Jensen property, just adjacent to the museum. So here are some examples. We've got LCJ again playing the pirates for our pirate chaser sails now, but that vessel is still being used. It is a charter vessel now. I can think it can take 17 passengers out, and it's still owned by the Jensens. That's Bob and Kathy Jensen there, dressed up as pirates, taking LCJ out. It has a 3-cylinder Kallenberg diesel engine, same as what Evelyn S. has. And if you've been to the museum and are familiar with the Wilhelm Baum, the tug that's out front, same thing. So those Kallenberg diesels. So they have that chug, chug, chug sound and that black smoke that spews out, which really is just iconic of that particular time period when those fish tugs were reigning supreme out of many small harbors here in Michigan. And then we've got a great picture of the one of the Jensen buildings. These were originally were net sheds for drying out those large gill nets. The museum is very, very excited because in just a very, very short time, we're purchasing that property, and we're looking to preserve that as a working waterfront, being able to have exhibits about commercial fishing there, as well as our small craft and outboard motors. And these buildings, these boats are all part of the Great Lakes Fisheries Heritage Trail, which is throughout Michigan. You can check that out online. And there's a number of fish tugs and fisheries and that sort of thing that is part of that fisheries heritage that you can follow and explore if you want to travel around Michigan. I will open it up to any questions on that so far.
Nothing yet.
Great. That means I'm covering everything.
You
Thanks,
are. Keep on rolling.
All right. So let's talk a little bit the different types of Great Lakes vessels that have been on the Great Lakes throughout time. I am not going to get to all of them. I'm just going to give broad categories here. So we'll see how it goes. But obviously canoes are one of the first vessels that we see here on the Great Lakes. We have the early Native American canoes where they're dugouts from one log, or they may be birch bark canoes like the one that you see here. Sept Nature Center actually has a couple of replicas of those that they take kids out on, and this is one of those images. The other one is a dugout canoe the museum actually has. The dugout that we have is actually a historic canoe, so it was not a Native American canoe. Traditionally, Native American canoes were burn and scrape, so they'd light a little bit on fire, and then they would use tools to dig out the central cavity that you would need for the boat. Historic canoes are not Native American built. They used tools and formed the boat a little bit more like the Europeans were used to with those vessels. So you might see a little bit more of a wine glass shape, but dugouts were used throughout time. I've even seen dugout canoes with a mount on the back for an outboard motor or a mast step. So for getting around the coast, these were great vessels. It's something that you may be able to even make yourself relatively easily to have a boat if you needed to do that. Of course, tall ships. Really, when you think about maritime history on the Great Lakes, you definitely are going to think about things like schooners and sloops. And there were a number of them. These were the workhorses of the Great Lakes, and we had a lot of industry here. We were moving a lot of product and people. And so these were the vessels that we know and love. I'm going to obviously point out Friends Goodwill, which is the museum's flagship there in the middle. That is a replica of a boat that was built by a merchant here in the Great Lakes in the early 1800s. It was also used as a military vessel during the War of 1812, seized by the British, seized back by the Americans, and later burned. It had a pretty short history from about 1810 to 1814. But it's a really great example of one of the first ships built on the Great Lakes, and again, a cargo carrier, as most of these ships were. And steamships. As we move into the age of steam, we're starting to use coal to fuel those boilers. We start seeing larger vessels with propellers, and we get into these steamships, which carried a lot of cargo, but also a lot of people. Certainly when we have the tall ships, we are moving people, but we can't move as many as we can on these beautiful steamships. People have a little bit more money to burn, so they're using it as excursion vessels. They may be day tripping. For example, on the right is the Eastland. And some of you may know the story of the Eastland, but that did many trips between Chicago and South Haven. We have the Theodore Roosevelt on the left. Also many kind of day trips or just a few trips on the Great Lakes. These aren't like ocean steamers where you're going to be on the boat for a month. You're looking at maybe a week tops, but usually about 3 days or just maybe a day trip. And then we have the city of South Haven. You can see US Mail on there. That was how we sent a lot of parcels and different types of cargo that went out of things like South Haven, like the fruit that we send out of South Haven or have sent out of South Haven traditionally and historically. So lots of these types of vessels on the Great Lakes.
I do have a question a minute now, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay, from Gary, said that you mentioned about eliminating commercial licenses, or there's talk about that, and that there are about 1,500 commercial fishers currently. Would they be grandfathered or just put out of business? And if so, why?
You know, I haven't done a lot of research on what's going on there. This is information coming through a different source, so I really couldn't answer that question, not with any accuracy. I have no idea what's going to happen to that. I don't know how far the bill is. You know, one of the reasons that it came up is because of our purchase of the Jensen property. You know, as we're moving forward, depending on what happens with that, we may not see commercial fishing at all, which is why it's so important to try and preserve some of those things. You know, this was an industry that was widespread throughout the Great Lakes, and once that industry is gone, and it's getting smaller and smaller pretty much each year, we want to make sure that we preserve those kinds of legacies and that kind of history. I mean, certainly here, the students that we have on our campus at the museum, they've never seen commercial fishing at all. They have no concept of what that meant. Now, their parents may not have a concept of what that meant either. Grandparents, however, do remember things like the Jensens. Oh yeah, I got my fish dinners there all the time. Or, you know, you could smell the fishery as you came around the corner to go over the drawbridge. Those are the sorts of things that we're looking to try and preserve, whatever happens with legislation. So I can't answer too much about the legislation. I really can only say to, you know, why it came up in conversation recently. I
Thank
hope
you.
that answers it enough.
Thanks.
Okay, was there anything else, Ken?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mhm.
Good question. Launches. Now, it is kind of important that these follow steamers really, because a lot of the steamers that were coming into South Haven were coming in with tourists that were going to stay for the day, for the month, the week, whatever it was. They couldn't get really far upriver. Again, these are large boats, and so this is true for many small harbors. The steamships, or the launches would go out to meet the steamships. So these, could think of them a little bit like water taxis. They would get the people, their luggage and everything, and maybe take them to the resorts upriver or picnic or wherever they were going, because these boats could make it a lot farther up the river than those steamships can. The picture that you are seeing on the kind of bottom there, tucked in the back, you can actually see the steam boiler for this particular launch, and that's taking tourists to Mooney's Resort here in South Haven. And then just above that, this is an early 1900s picture of actually where you saw that Jensen building in the earlier photos that we had. This is that location. So this is kind of where the museum is and the new property, with the roller coaster there, with the launch rides. We like to liken that to what we're doing right now, because on the right, you'll see our boat, Lindy Lou, our river cruiser. It's an electric launch. You know, we're offering sort of these experiences, this amusement, and these river launch rides right here off that same property. So in addition to trying to preserve that property for the historic fishery factor, we're also preserving it for all of the history that property has, which is, you know, about 150 years worth of different things going on that property, but this specifically. And I will tell you, sometimes in the summertime, it feels like a circus. So seeing the roller coaster there makes a lot of sense to us. And freighters. Obviously, we still see freighters on the Great Lakes, not as many as we used to. We have various types of Great Lakes freighters. See the Edmund Fitzgerald on the bottom there. We've got a self-unloader in the middle, a whaleback on the right, and then that picture that you can see just on the left there is actually South Haven. So that was the original turning basin. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with South Haven, but mostly where that boat is right now, that's all marina. So there really wouldn't be an option for turning basin in there right now. So that was dredged pretty consistently. It is delivering material to what was the Horan Ready Mix cement property right there. But they certainly changed, as we can see through time. We've got bigger boats, we can carry more cargo, so we're still moving quite a bit of material on the Great Lakes, and have done for quite some time in a variety of different vessels. And what I find interesting just about these is how we have really adapted our vessels for use. Working vessels have changed through time, so we could fit more things on them, we can make fewer trips, we can get there faster and safer, and all of those great things that we know about now. Any questions on any of those up until this point?
Nothing else.
Okay, great. And small craft, so now we kind of move away from our industry and commercial shipping into something a little bit more recreational. Now, I don't know how many of you are boaters up there in Holland, but you probably recognize a Lightning. These were very popular in the 40s and 50s for kind of first-time small sailboats. So there were just fleets of these things all over the place. And South Haven was the headquarters for that in the 1940s, and I think for quite some time. They had an office that operated upstairs in the bank where Clementine's is now. The museum has a Lightning. sailboat flashback. Hopefully we'll have her out on display next year. And then over on the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see Rowita 3, which is now Bernita. The museum also has that vessel. It's an R-class racing yacht that was built in 1921. And Bernita is going to be celebrating her 100th anniversary this coming year, so we'll be doing a lot to celebrate that with her. Various other small craft. Of course, after World War II, there was an influx of money coming to people. They were changing or transitioning into recreational boating. So we see a huge spike in those kinds of vessels like Chris Craft, which up in Holland you'll be familiar with up there. And things like the Snipe that you can see there on the left. And then we have a 1929 Chris Craft Cadet, Maritime, which is down there on the bottom, and we take charters out on that as well. All right, so World War II. I think certainly when I was studying World War II in school, we didn't talk about the Great Lakes at all and the impact that they had, and it was actually pretty substantial. There was a lot done here for the war effort. We have Coast Guard vessels that were here. That's the Escanaba that you can see up in the upper left. That actually left the Great Lakes and was torpedoed by the Germans. We have the multiple shipyards that transitioned from making some recreational craft and other craft to making things like the boats that you see, their landing craft, things like that. We had Dashiell Carter Shipyard around St. Joe, Benton Harbor area. Truscott did the same. I know Chris Craft did the same. We had at least 785 boats that were built here, including minesweepers, submarines were built over in Wisconsin. A lot of the subs came out of Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and they kind of floated them down the Mississippi and they went out the Gulf of Mexico in order to get to the Pacific and the Atlantic spheres. And then we had 2 aircraft carriers here in the Great Lakes. And those were converted steamships that they made into aircraft carriers. And they were a little bit shorter, smaller than your normal aircraft carrier. And they used them for pilot training. So the idea was if you could take off and land and here in the Great Lakes on these aircraft carriers, you could do it from anywhere. And they were stationed out of Chicago. The reason they were on Lake Michigan, I'll go all the way back to the beginning of the presentation, is because Lake Michigan was the only Great Lake entirely within the United States. We didn't have to worry about foreign spies from Canada or those sorts of things. So that's why they were doing it here in Lake Michigan. There is nothing left of either one of these. They were dismantled and scrapped after the war, which is kind of sad. However, there are some planes that did have some accidents in the training process that are still at the bottom of the lake, and some that have been raised. You can actually see a couple of those planes at Air Zoo. They've raised them and are restoring them, and they'll go to new homes once they're fully restored. They've got a Wildcat and a Corsair, which is very cool. So if you get a chance to go to their restoration center, I would highly recommend it. Okay, so the United States Life Saving Service and the Coast Guard, certainly a big part of the Great Lakes here. Maybe different in that some of their roles were different later on for the Coast Guard than other places we know. But the Life Saving Service itself was established in 1871 and was all volunteers. This was really for helping people in distress on the water. It merged with the United States Revenue Cutter Service in 1915 and created what we now know is the Coast Guard. The motto they currently have is Semper Paratus, which is always ready. The previous motto they had was, you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. I think my job here has really taught me a lot about the history of the Coast Guard and just how tough these people were and the conditions in which they went out in. I look at today, for example, where I've got, you know, gale force winds coming through, I can see out of my office window, and thinking that, you know, this is the sort of stuff that they had to deal with. And there was no, well, it's a small craft warning, I can't go out today. They had to get out there to save lives. So I think that's something to be really, really commended. There are 16 active Coast Guard stations in Michigan. There are 30 all along the Great Lakes. And last year we celebrated the 80th anniversary of the Coast Guard Auxiliary, which is a group of all volunteers. And they are still part of the Coast Guard. They have orders, they have missions. Their boats are volunteer boats, so they're personal craft until they're called in to be used for rescues or training or whatever, and then they actually are Coast Guard vessels. So it's a pretty interesting relationship that they've got with the Coast Guard Auxiliary and the United States Coast Guard. Each year we have an annual Coast Guard cleanup where we have Coasties, we have Sea Cadets, and we have Auxiliary. They all come out to the museum. They help to polish the brass in our exhibits, pay homage to the boats and the history that we have here, clean it all up, get it all ready so we can put our best face on for the Coast Guard exhibits before the opening of the season, and then we give them all lunch. So that's something that we've done for I think over 20 years now, and it's just such a great opportunity to honor those men and women and really continue to do so today as much as the past. Here's some historic photos and some recent photos. You can see this is in the center there, the gentleman. This was shore duty. So they would walk a couple miles up and down shore looking for any people, boats in distress on the shore, and that happened 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The picture on the upper left is of a 26-foot pulling surf boat where they're doing some training out in that. If you get a chance to come to our Coast Guard exhibit, you can see a historic video of them doing that training. It's pretty entertaining. Just below that is a picture of the Maritime. This is a vessel that the museum has on exhibit. It is an 1881 life-saving service vessel. It's equipped with both sails and oarlocks so it could be rowed. It's self-bailing as well as self-righting. So in the fore and aft compartments, there are cork, and that cork helps the upper part of the boat to be light and buoyant, and so it wants to turn itself back over if it capsizes. So this was something really important in Coast Guard vessels. We can see South Haven's Coast Guard Station when it was still standing. It actually had a fire and burned in 1979, I believe. But that's kind of what it looks like. And this is what we fashioned our boathouse after, was a traditional Coast Guard boathouse. And these are pretty standard, as you can imagine, with a government organization all across the Great Lakes coastline. The small building that you can see in the right, kind of upper right, I guess, of that photo is a small outfit, and they kept paint and rope and different things in there. We actually have that original building on our campus that did not burn in the fire, and that's been restored, and we now talk about the life-saving service in there as well as knot tying. In the upper right, you can see the 1941 Coast Guard motor lifeboat, a 36-footer. This is on long-term loan to the museum. We do take people out on it. These boats were really remarkable, I think. They were self-righting and self-bailing, and then the center compartment, the engine's actually in a watertight compartment. So if this boat turns over, it has a 2,000-pound bronze keel that wants to be on the bottom, so that helps with the self-righting. And then because of that watertight compartment, they don't have to worry about stopping to really try and get that engine going again. So we can show the development of the Coast Guard boats throughout time, and the technology that came along with that showcases, you know, that the Coast Guard was looking at how can we get to people faster and how can we save more lives. Really fascinating stuff. Any questions on that? Okay.
Nope. Nothing yet.
No problem at all. We'll keep on moving. Okay, so some civil engineering projects. Obviously, canals and locks are really important to the recreation and industry that we have on the Great Lakes, and certainly the development of who we are as a state of Michigan. So in 1825, we see the Erie Canal finished. It's connecting the Atlantic to the Hudson River to Lake Erie. So now we're kind of opening up ourselves for receiving goods and people and all that sort of stuff. You know, from much farther away, much easier to access. And again, these weren't things that were built really using machines. A lot of manpower went into constructing these things. So I find that absolutely incredible, really, if you think about that kind of civil engineering project. And if we would undertake that today with people, there's just no possible way that we would do that. 1829, we see the Welland Canal that's connecting Lake Ontario to Lake Erie. So we're circumventing the Niagara Falls. This is going to open up a whole lot of trade for us into Lake Erie and to the upper lakes, which is Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. Not too much longer after that, we actually see Michigan as a state. So I have a hard time believing that those things aren't connected. We're seeing these canals being built. We're seeing, you know, more ships, more people moving in. And then in 1837, all of a sudden, you know, Michigan's a state. We have enough people here and settlement and business and industry and all that sort of thing that we're able to actually establish ourselves as a state. Not too much longer after that, we're now connecting Lake Superior with the Upper Lakes. So that's going to open up a whole new region for natural resources. And it makes sense given what we're doing in this area and how many natural resources we have. During that whole period, we're going to see a lot of contention between English and the French and Native Americans and Americans. So there's a lot going on there in that same time period as well. From the Lake Superior all the way out the St. Lawrence Seaway, we see a 600-foot drop in elevation. So building canals and locks is imperative to our ability to move back and forth on these waterways. And at the time that these were being built, we didn't have roads. We hadn't really developed a good road system. So it's safer, faster, and just all around better to try and travel by the water. So this is why so much effort was put into building these sorts of things and having these civil engineering projects completed. So we have a total right now of 16 locks that are still functioning in that 600-foot drop or, elevation. Lighthouses. Who doesn't love a lighthouse? And look at that lighthouse. Man, she's pretty. We certainly love her. She's very photogenic, even in the middle of the winter when ice is totally coating the whole thing. Michigan has more lighthouses than any other state. We have 129 of them. Not all of them are technically lighthouses. South Haven, for example, is actually a beacon because there is no house attached to it. We have a keeper's house, which is up on the hill away from the light, and the keeper would have to travel from their house to the light, sometimes on the catwalk, depending on how far the water was breaking over the pier head, to actually light the lantern. Obviously now we have electrical mechanisms that we can deal with that now. South Haven in particular is no longer a navigational light, so it, I guess you could say it was kind of decommissioned by the Army Corps of Engineers, who is responsible for all the navigation lights around the state. But the longest keeper we had here was Captain James Donahue, who was keeper of the light for 36 years. He was involved in 11 different rescues, and 2 of which were his twin sons that he had to save. He lost a leg in the Battle of Shiloh during the Civil War, but was still a keeper. He had a crutch, and there are stories of him crawling on the catwalk with the lantern in his teeth just to make sure that that lantern was lit. That was the entire job of those keepers, and also their families. So there was a whole family affair. So they lived in the house with their families, and often the wives took over if the husbands were sick, or the sons or daughters or whatever. So really kind of an interesting cultural background for that. And there's many books out there that you can take a look at if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the keepers of the light. There are 4 lights that have catwalks. I know when I made this presentation, I remembered them all, and now I don't. I do know St. Joe has one, and South Haven has one, and I'm for some reason blanking on the rest, so I apologize for that, but I will be looking that up as soon as this presentation is done. The first Michigan lighthouse was the Fort Gratiot Light, which was commissioned in 1825. So that's over on the other side of the state in Lake Huron, which really makes a lot of sense if you think about, again, our civil engineering projects of canals and locks that were being built. So here we get to my favorite part. As you heard, my background is in shipwrecks. I am a maritime archaeologist. That's what intrigues me. I'm a scuba diver as well, though I haven't done it for a while. But I've always loved the Great Lakes. I've been diving in a number of different places, really in the Atlantic and the Caribbean, you know, those kinds of things. But the Great Lakes has just always held something significant for me. And maybe that's because they're in my blood. I was born here after all. But we have 6,000, probably more than 6,000 shipwrecks in the Great Lakes, all types of vessels from every time period that you can imagine. When you have as many boats on the water as we have had, you are bound to have accidents and things that go awry. We have a very unique environment here in the Great Lakes. The depth, the width, the behavior, the weather, all play a part as to why we have so many shipwrecks. We have probably more shipwrecks per square mile of coastline than anywhere in the world. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we have narrow, shallow lakes, so navigating them can be a little bit tricky if you get into weather issues. Unlike the ocean or larger bodies of water, there's not a whole lot of wiggle room for error. We have a lot of shoals or shallow areas where you could run aground if pushed by weather, and it's tough to navigate. I've heard a lot of mariners call it threading the needle because it's just, you know, difficult. And of course, now we have GPS, so that makes our lives infinitely better. And we don't have nearly as many shipwrecks as we used to. We also don't have as many boats on the water either. Again, weather, most common reason that we have shipwrecks here. We kind of talked about the gale force winds that we see. I can't help but think of those gales of November coming not long from now. A lot of shipwrecks happen in that same time period. Vessels are rushing to make those final deliveries, continue that season before the lakes start freezing and they can't operate anymore. So you're just really pushing it and pushing it and pushing it as much as you can to get as much money as you can for that season before it's done. And then for shipwrecks here, it's certainly a unique environment because we have cold, fresh water. So that's a really great preservative for the wood and metal that we have. And so we have some really spectacular shipwrecks. They kind of are time capsules, and they're preserved in a way where we can see artifacts on them. We can really tell what was going on in that particular time period and that particular moment for shipwrecks. So it's a really cool situation to have and be able to study those shipwrecks that we have here. One of those mottos I like to have while diving, and a lot of divers do as stewards of Great Lakes shipwrecks, is that you take only pictures, you leave only bubbles. And it's very similar to, you know, take only pictures, leave only footprints when you're in things like national parks or those kinds of places. These are heritage sites. In many cases, they're grave sites. It's important to leave those items where they are and not pick them up. They're better preserved where they are than if we were to bring them out of the water. So I do get that question a lot. Well, they're just rotting down there. If we bring it up, the more people can see it. Well, when you bring something out of the water that's been in there for a long time, it's going to start deteriorating faster. And unless you have the time and the money, and it's very expensive to preserve those shipwreck or those ship pieces or parts or artifacts, it's actually better to leave it where it is. You're leaving it in the fridge, so it's going to last longer. Additionally, more people get the opportunity to see it. Technology is getting better, so virtual tours of shipwrecks and pictures and things like that. We can access a world that even divers or non-divers can access shipwrecks. And then scientists can learn a lot more. It tells us a lot more when we can still see all of those features on a shipwreck than if it's been stripped bare. So, and here are some examples of shipwrecks. These are just a few. They come in all sizes, all different types, all different locations. We have shipwrecks on the shore, in deep water, in shallow water, just pretty much everything that you could possibly imagine. You don't have to be a diver, you can snorkel. We, I guess, have our friend the zebra mussel to thank a little bit for that. So there's a lot of opportunity to get out there and explore shipwrecks, even if you're not a diver. Okay, so now it's my shameless plug for the Michigan Maritime Museum. We're a pretty great place. We recommend that you come and check us out. Right now, we're open Fridays and Saturdays for at least the next couple of weeks. We will be closed this winter with the pandemic. It's certainly changed a little bit of how we operate, but next year we hope we'll be a little bit more back to normal. This is really a great picture because you can see the museum campus. It really wraps around from the left. You can see where Evelyn S is, that gravel area we usually have a tent on. Our main exhibit, our Van Oort Coast Guard building, our boathouse, our docks, and now very soon we'll own the Jensen property as well. So we're right at the heart of the Maritime District in South Haven, and we like to think we're the heart of the Maritime District in South Haven. Current exhibits that we have right now, our main exhibit is all about the role that Lake Michigan played during World War II. So just kind of whetted your appetite for that with this presentation, but we hope you'll come and experience that with us. We'll have that for at least the next year. Our Coast Guard building, we have 4 historic wooden Coast Guard rescue vessels that are on display, and you can learn all about them from different time periods. Our working boat shed where we do our boat repairs. We're getting ready for downrigging for our tall ship, so there's a lot that'll be going on this weekend with that, so there'll be a lot of activity in there. Evelyn S, our commercial fish tug, again, 1939 gillnet commercial fish tug. She will be open again next year. There's interpretive material outside, but we did have to close her down because of COVID. And then we've really been struggling with high water this year. Our antique outboard motor collection has been closed actually for the last 2 years because of high water. It is located in a historic net reel shed over on the Jensen property, but you would have had to swim to get there. So we have brought some of those out and they're on display in our Padnos boat shed right now. And we hope to be able to open that back up sometime soon if the water ever goes back down. Of course, we have an on-water fleet. So we have Friends Goodwill, our tall ship. We have Lindy Lou, our river cruiser, the 36-foot motor lifeboat, our Chris Craft, and then Bernita, which is right kind of there on the end. She's been demasted. This looks like it was maybe in the fall for this picture. So there's lots of opportunities for you to explore our amazing exhibits, but also to get out on the water and really step aboard history. So you have an opportunity to see what it was like when these boats and ships were on the water. And the purchase of the Jensen property is all part of our launching a legacy capital campaign. So this is an $8 million campaign that we're in the middle of. We'll have new docks, new property, new buildings. The main museum building would be coming down here. We'll have a brand new facility that will allow us to be open year round. It'll have 2 floors. We'll have additional exhibit space. It'll have a classroom, which makes me very excited because I'll be able to do things like this from the classroom instead of my office. So there's a lot of really great opportunities that we'll have that we just don't have right now as we're quickly outgrowing the current campus that we have. So you want to learn a little bit more about that, you can visit our website, and there's web pages that'll give you a little bit more information about what we've got going on there, or I can take some questions here at the end. You can follow us on social media. We would love to have you do that. We have lots of great pictures. In a normal non-global pandemic year, we have tons of events. You can always become a member as well, and that gets you free admission onto the campus for most all the time, with the exception of some of those special events. But we've got, fish boils and lecture series. and just tons of things, boat shows, all sorts of stuff that you can come and enjoy here at the Michigan Maritime Museum. So we'll hope to see you next year. I want to thank you so much for joining me here today and allowing me to share some Great Lakes Maritime history with you. And Kim, I'll open it up to any questions that folks might have.
Great. Okay. We have one comment that another catwalk is Grand Haven.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. And then a question, what is the correct pronunciation of Fort Gratiot? Was it a French
Gratiot.
settlement at that time? Gratiot.
Gratiot. Yep, Fort Gratiot.
And was it a French settlement at the time?
Oh, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't think so, but it's possible that when the lighthouse was created, I know it wasn't, but it probably was some sort of French inspired settlement. Obviously we have a lot of French names because even if the French weren't occupying it, we had a lot of voyageurs for fur trading going on. So there's a lot of French inspiration in that.
Okay. A question from Mark is, are lighthouses still being maintained by the government as modern navigation methods do not need them?
Yes and no. There are lighthouses like South Havens, for example, which is really a decommissioned lighthouse that is owned and we'll say quote unquote operated by our local historical association. There are other lighthouses that have been decommissioned that have been sold off and are now private property. And then the ones that they do still consider as aids to navigation are still taken care of by the Army Corps of Engineers.
Awesome, thank you. Another question from Richard, your map of shipwrecks, are the dates of the map different?
Are the dates of the map different? Let's go back to that one. Of the two different maps. Okay, so these are images that are taken from our partners at the Michigan Shipwreck Research Association. These are really more locations than dates. So I believe some of these are showing the ones that are a little bit farther out in the water and then ones that are a little bit more coastal, so that there's a little bit more of a close-up, because a lot of the shipwrecks that we have are groundings, so they're much more close to shore, so that way they could have two maps and list everything without it being so crazy. So it's a modern navigation map with plotted kind of points for where the shipwrecks are currently located. So these are shipwrecks that we actually know about or have a general inkling that they're there, but much more information will be available on these individual shipwrecks and that kind of through the Michigan Shipwreck Research Association. Now, you guys are in Holland. Their base is out of Holland. They do an annual meeting at the Knickerbocker Theater there, and I'm sure many of you know of Valerie Van Heest. Maybe she's done a presentation for you too. So she's the president of that organization, and we kind of work in tandem with them for information when it comes to shipwrecks here in the Great Lakes.
Also a question, if you know why there is no more foghorn the last few years in Holland?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, that's all right. Another question from Margaret asking if you would differentiate between what is a ship and what is a boat.
Oh boy.
It just come down to size, or how does it? Well, no, probably not, because
it does. I think it actually comes down to rigging. When I see boats, they're on the bottom. They had a horrible day. So the whole rigging part is not there anymore. So that's not really my bailiwick, but I believe it has to do with really the rigging on it when it's a ship and when it's a boat. Technically, all of the boats that we have are boats, not ships. But for these purposes, I'm really talking mostly, tall ships. So it's kind of been bandied about over time for that. So that's the best I can say as far as an expert answer for right now.
Okay, thank you. And then how do you see climate change affecting the Great Lakes? And yes, what about the high water level?
Do you have another hour?
We do have a class coming up on climate change. I don't know if it's addressing the Great Lakes, but.
Well, I hope so, because I am not a climate scientist, so I'm not going to make any claims, about that. But it's certainly the high water, and what we're seeing with the changes with the swings is we're seeing more frequent and more violent sort of storms. The things that we saw, this year were the seiches, which are the pushed by wind, where we see those really quick rises in water and then it recedes. That has a lot to do with the changes in the climate. Certainly since I've been here in the past, 6 years, I've seen more intensity to the things that we've had. The winds are stronger, the storms are stronger. It's affected our ability to sail, and have our boats out on the water. So that's a change. The high water comes with its, challenges, and just cyclically we see that in the Great Lakes. There are highs and lows. The last really high water that we saw, I think here, was in 86, 87, somewhere in there. We're still here. This year, unfortunately, we've seen some really bad erosion on our campus, part of it, so that's been a factor. We've had some undercutting that we've had to mitigate and deal with as we move forward into our campaign, and we look at the Jensen property, for example. We're going to look at raising that property level up past the floodplain, so we don't have to deal with this sort of problem once our buildings are set and things over there. So, we have to look at it and think about the high water, but we also have to know, and all of the experts are saying at some point it's going to go down again. I got married here in 2013, and it was the lowest water that they'd seen, and I don't know when. And there were a lot of people saying it'll never bounce back. We'll never have the lake levels. Well, now here we are, not that long after, and we're seeing unprecedented high waters. So it's kind of hard to make those predictions, but we're looking at it, and what can we do here as a museum? Certainly having education on it and talking about it is a great thing. I've got the shipwreck slide up, and that has made a huge difference on shipwrecks, because things are getting covered, they're getting uncovered, they're getting scoured. So it's changing that site formation process on those historic sites. So it's important now more than ever to make sure that we're consistently going out there and recording those shipwrecks, because we don't just want to know what happened to the shipwreck then. We need to be watching the processes of what's happened since then. That's all part of that story on that particular archaeological site. So the changes that we've seen in high water and the violence of the storms and things we're seeing it makes a difference. Not having ice last year made a huge difference, because we saw a lot more erosion happening to our dunes and beaches and things like that. So we're seeing things pop out of there that we didn't know were there, or that have been safe and secure because they were under sand and now aren't. So it's definitely having a huge impact from, for a historical standpoint, as well as for what we're, how we're living our lives right now.
Thank you. Related to that, a question that it seems like the majority of shipwrecks on the map are in the area between Muskegon and South Haven. Is that because of commercial shipping and that being where the traffic is?
I think it has a lot to do with where the harbors were that ships could pull in, where they were doing business, especially harbors that connected inland waterways to those harbors, because you can bring a lot of goods by water. Again, we didn't have the roads, so that may be part of it. Chicago was a huge point. So as you're following closer to the coastline on your way to Chicago, and we have some pretty epic storms right in this area, as I'm sure you all know. So that does make a lot of sense that we'd have it. And now we're only looking at the Michigan side. There's a lot of shipwrecks over on the Wisconsin side as well. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these maps. This is only really telling you part of the story. So there's really shipwrecks everywhere. But again, maintain settlements that have been there for a while, you're bound to see more shipwrecks a little bit closer to those ports.
Another question is whether or not you know if tourism is increasing with more ships on the Great Lakes.
I guess I don't quite understand the question.
Okay, that's all I have. So
Yeah.
Jane, if you want to describe that further, unmute yourself. Jane, feel free to do that and tell us more about what you're looking for with that question. While we wait to see if she does that, I have a question. Oh, go ahead, Jane. I see you.
Yep,
Go ahead.
Yep.
Well, we've seen an increase, I think it's an increase, that's part of my question, in ships that are now circulating the Great Lakes for tourism purposes.
Okay. Yeah.
Is it really an increase, and is it helping our tourist industry?
Well, I am not an expert in the tourism industry, so yes, I think we have seen an increase. We know that Viking cruise ships is doing more Great Lakes cruises. They just signed a contract with somebody or something this past year. I'm sure they haven't done much of it this year. So we'll see how the pandemic has affected tourism in that way. It's going to change tourism for sure, because there's a lot of ports like South Haven, for example, that may not be able to take in some of those large ships. We don't have the electrical hookups. We're not a commercial harbor. We're a recreational harbor. But would we like to? Maybe. That'd be great for our town, probably. Do we have the infrastructure to support it? I don't know. So I imagine there's a lot of towns like ours that are wondering that same question. And I think it's a double-edged sword, really. You know, can we handle it? So I guess we'll just kind of see what shakes out from that. I mean, historically, people were doing it, so it makes sense that we might see a resurgence of people doing something like that. But I'm sure it's going to come with its problems as well.
Thank you, Jane. My question is, so since I've been up here this week, I've seen a freighter almost every day. What are they carrying?
I don't know right
Okay.
now. I really don't. I'm sure you've got somebody in the audience even now that knows probably what they're carrying at the moment. And I'm sure that varies by time of year. You know, up that way, I'm sure a lot of cherries are moving during you know, that time period. So I would guess one of the largest things we've got moving is limestone. We produce a lot of cement. Alpena has Lafarge, which is a large cement plant. So it's probably a lot of natural resources, as it has been historically as well. So.
Okay. Anyone else? I think I've hit them all that I have in the chat.
Ashley, I think on behalf of HASP, I want to thank you for this presentation. Obviously, we all share an interest in Lake Michigan. It's our western boundary, and I want to thank you very much for sharing it with HASP. And we hope we have you back and talk about some other particular topics, which I've been thinking about as we listen to this. So thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate that. Thanks for having me.
This was great, very timely. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here, everyone. I did record this and it will be loaded to the HASP YouTube page after the semester is over. Thanks again for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Ashley.